Here we
Hey
go.
everybody, Chris Thurber here from Expert Online Training with one of my best friends in the whole world, Scott Arizala, and we're going to give you some new plans, new ideas for Staff Training Week. So Scott, thanks for doing this, man. I've been psyched
Yeah,
to see you.
yeah, for sure. I was just telling my dad that it's funny that you're technically the moderator and I'm technically the guest. Whenever we get on stuff like this, I don't think you can ever tell because we both have so much to say. So thanks for
Yeah.
inviting me. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, so look, everybody, just a couple of things. If you're joining us on one of these EOT Express webinars for the first time, I'll get a little bit of the announcements done at the beginning. Scott and I can say a word or two about the work that we do, but this is part of a series that is sponsored by Expert Online Training and our good friends at everythingsummercamp.com. And we've endeavored to do at least one webinar a month that is topical, that is timely, and that is efficient. So we're going to spend 30 minutes giving you lots of ideas. You can use the chat box that's on the side of your screen to write in questions. But we're just going to get going here, and let me just make sure that the chat room is open on my screen so I can kind of see. By the way, really nice that people have already typed in their names and kind of where they're from, and I'll let Scott introduce himself. And while he's doing that, put a little sticky message up there for people to shout out where they're calling from, where they're tuning in from. So go ahead, Scott.
Great. Thanks, Chris. My name is Scott Arizala. I'm a summer camp consultant and trainer. And for those of you out there who are transitioning yourselves into sort of the active training time, both Chris and I, this is one of our very favorite times of the year because we get to sort of pivot out of the youth development conference season into the camp training season, which puts us basically on the ground with all of your young people. So it's one of my very favorite times of the year that I get to do this work. Outside of that, I'm a consultant, so I do a lot of work during the year with individual camps and youth development programs, as well as I'm an author. I write for Camping Magazine, and of course I'm a faculty member. And I'm so unsure of my title these days, Chris, but I work with Expert Online Training on a number of levels. So those are
there
all.
You go. Expert Online Training senior staff. You're the mayor of Expert
Got it.
Online
Oh,
Training.
okay. I'm the mayor. That's how I'm gonna start introducing myself. The mayor of EOT.
Cool. So I'm Chris Thurber. I'm a psychologist by training. Here I am in my office at school, which is my September to May job. And during the summer, like Scott, I get the honor and joy of working with a lot of different day camps, overnight camps, parks and rec departments, summer youth programs, doing in-person, face-to-face training. But as you can see, Scott and I both enjoy being able to reach people and provide original educational content in all sorts of creative ways, and we don't wait for the summer to do it, man. So there we go. If you don't know what Expert Online Training is, it's a website that hosts a library of 130 video training modules. Our library is always growing. This is designed to complement your on-site training, so you can go into greater depth in your on-site training. You can train on basic, intermediate, and advanced topics in a self-paced, internet-based way. Almost all college kids, which is the lifeblood of our staff, do online learning. So this is a format that they're really comfortable with. And as the world gets more complicated with staff training, but we don't get extra days to train our staff, it's really nice to have a mix of pre-arrival online training and on-site training. And training, by the way, is our topic for today. So Scott, we are going to talk today about both ideas for content for Staff Training Week, and here we're really talking about when you have your staff on site, as well as structure. And earlier today, you and I were talking about a couple of innovative, structure ideas. When I think about Staff Training Week in a traditional sense, I'm looking at a calendar. It may be a couple of weekends. It may be a sort of Monday through Friday deal. Maybe it's a whole week, maybe even longer. But it just looks like, okay, this is what's at 8, this is what's at 9, this is what's at 10, and then Tuesday and then Wednesday. Give us some new ideas for structure.
Sure. I mean, well, first of all, let's all be real with ourselves. It's May 16th, and we have all kind of hit that point where everybody, including myself, we're all freaking out about staff training, right? Because it's right around the corner. So chances are we didn't put a lot of the time in that we wanted to, those dreams we had in September. We didn't pay attention when Scott and Chris and everybody else told us in February and March to start working on it. And here we are in May, and we're like, oh no. But I want everyone to know that we're all in the same boat. All of us do it. And one of the things that we do is we turn to last year's schedule and we look and okay, this flow is pretty good and whatnot. I want us to sort of like look at that same schedule with like a little bit of a different lens. A lot of times we see that what's happening in 8 or 9 or 10 or the first weekend versus the second weekend, and we think about what are the skills that we're teaching. What's the knowledge that we're giving in those moments? Is it policies and procedures? Is it the skills around emergency procedures? Is it what has been called soft skills, like connecting with kids or dealing with homesickness or whatnot? Right. We tend to think about these sessions like that, and while that's important, I want us to sort of rethink about what we're trying to accomplish with the training. I want us to think about, instead of a list of skills or a list of sort of knowledge, I want us to try and think about what Sarah Kurtz McKinnon labeled for me as sort of core competencies, really thinking about what are the big buckets we're trying to fill. An example that you and I, Chris, were talking about earlier was I really want staff that are compassionate, sort of thoughtful staff. So what does that mean? Through my homesickness session, through my creative programming session, through talking about the rules and policies, like a staff manual type session, through anything, how am I getting a compassionate person at the end? What are the skills that I'm teaching, and sort of what's the framework I'm giving them to understand how to use these skills? So if we're talking about homesickness, for example, I always love to pick on homesickness because I always get to say, well, what's the 5 things my friend Chris taught me to do?
That's right.
As opposed to just thinking about that, I want them to think about, all right, here's this kid who seems upset in front of me. My first job is to be this compassionate person, to listen and try to understand where they're at, to try and connect with them, to try and maybe just physically be there and not say a word, right? Yep. And then I can think to myself, this is starting to look or feel or sound a little bit like homesickness. Well, I know Dr. Thurber told me some genuine empathy is something that I should show right at the beginning. So how do I do that? And sort of then start marching down like maybe a specific skill list or whatnot. But again, I really want our staff to be competent in these sort of core areas, these pillars, I think is the word you used before.
Yeah. So, as an educator, what I really like about what you said is when we can introduce, even now, preseason, I guess I'll go down to Alabama to do one of my first staff training workshops or staff training days of the season on Wednesday. So, like you said, we're amping up, and it's not preseason anymore for people. It's like the season, but it's not too late to identify for your staff what these core competencies are, what these pillars are. Most people tuning in, either watching this live or the recording, could say what their camp's motto is or what the mission of their summer youth program is. And you're asking them to do, and I put up in the chat room, I want people to identify what their top 2 competencies are. There may be 4 or 5, but it sounds like you're talking about a pretty short list that you want people to anchor each training workshop that they're doing during the week too. And like I said, as an educator, what I like about that is it is going to stick. If I can learn 50 skills, but they all relate back to like 3 competencies,
exactly,
then they go in those buckets and they stay anchored, as you said. And I really think that Staff Training Week will, for all of us who are taking this advice, seem less disjointed or less like this potpourri of things that we need to do, but rather, a variety. I had to sneak in the word potpourri. Okay. It's very
well, but there are 2 things that I want to comment on though. One is that I think it takes out a little bit of the stress for all of us, because if you're like me at all, we're list makers, we have all it, and you just know in middle of May, you're looking at that list, and you're like, I can't, even with expert online training, I can't cover everything, right? And that automatically makes me feel like insecure and nervous, right? I would much rather wipe that stress away and go, well, I know I can't cover everything, but can I cover these big ideas? Can I get these pillars? Can I get everyone pointed in that direction, so that as I'm doing my coaching all summer long, I have something that I'm pointing back to. It's a lot for the educators, the other teachers and educators who are watching this webinar. You guys have been talking about sort of spiral curriculum for a long time. How do you sort of keep coming back to this idea? Something in the camp space that I've been sort of attaching on to that, that I think is a good example for all of us, is this idea of teamwork. I think it's such an important theme that we got to keep coming back to, and we've got to teach to it. I can't tell you, I'm sure you've seen this too, how many like staff training schedules I've looked at where sometime in the afternoon on like the first day, they do like a 1 hour, team building exercise. And then teamwork or team play or team building is like nowhere else for the week on the schedule.
Right.
And it's like, it's almost as if we're like, oh, we checked off teamwork, so we're good at that. Now we're going to move on. And if all of us, if we're honest about it and we really look back at all of our issues from last summer or from the summers, my guess is 90+% of them are adult issues, like teamwork and team play issues, not necessarily kid issues. So what a great idea to keep coming back to and sort of, again, spiraling around as we are talking about all the different content areas that we have to talk about. Is there a way we can keep driving it back? Can one of the learning points be, well, how do we do this together as a team? What does it mean when we're working together in small groups, co-counselor groups, or maybe bigger unit groups, or whatever words you guys use at the particular camps? What does it look like? What does it mean? How do we talk to each other? All those kinds of things.
So, I asked people to write sort of what do they think their top 2 core competencies are, and some people are saying, well, I wrote as examples: compassion, conscientiousness, teamwork, presence. When I think, for example, of compassion, you use the example of the compassion that we might show someone who's feeling homesick. In this idea of spiral learning, where you're going to return to this concept of compassion, I'm reminded of some of the work that I did over the last few summers at Camp Belknap in dining services, which, as wasn't really my wheelhouse. I was in aquatics for 25 years, but being part of the dining services team, I realized, okay, one of the ways that we can show compassion is by not blowing off some of the requests to, for example, separate compost from garbage, or make sure the silverware actually goes in, the forks go in the fork bucket, the dirty spoons go in the dirty spoon bucket, knives. So it's because it might not seem like a big deal as you're dropping off your plate, but somebody's going to have to sort that if you haven't done your job. And it's, it's inconsiderate, which is the opposite of compassionate, to behave in that way. And so if you have your director of dining services stand up in front of the staff and, kind of do a lot of finger wagging and say, put your dirty spoons in the dirty spoon bucket and the knives in, and there's no rationale, or there's no, understanding, and there's no compassion, it's probably not going to happen, or it's just going to seem like this is one more thing we're being asked to do, but I don't get where this fits in the puzzle. And if there are these core competencies, and like you as the director are able to say, thank you, Judy, for sharing this, you all realize this is connected to our pillar or core competency of compassion, right?
Yeah, no, and that's exactly right. Think about how much stuff we frame as just like a bunch of rules. It's like, oh, we got to remember this.
Right.
Judy's going to get mad in the kitchen, and nobody wants to piss Judy off. And the same with the waterfront director. It's like, what is it? It's like I think it's in this order too. It's typically the cook, the nurse, the maintenance folks, and the waterfront director. Like those are in that order. You don't want to piss people off, and those typically are like some of the people that are like the hardest to work with, because of we don't really understand their job as far as like what they do for camp, but they're sort of necessary to camp. And oftentimes it feels like we're just finger wagging, like, you got to take your kids on time for evening meds. It's like really making the nurse crazy. That might be true, but how effective is that when you're just like yelling at a bunch of people like, you did it wrong? Versus, can we back up and be like, we really care about Anne, our nurse. She makes things happen here. Yes, it's all behind the scenes, but if without her, we can't have camp. And so, like, let's understand where she's coming from. Like, 1 million kids take evening meds. So what are we going to do to help remember to help make her job easier, and remember to get them there somewhere between post evening activity and prior to getting in showers or PJs or whatever we're doing. So just framing it differently, I think, would help a lot of people be like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and we care about her. It falls into the pattern of compassion or how whatever we're talking about. But again, back to your point, it makes it feel better. It makes it make more sense when we're training during.
Yeah. No, that's great. What about content ideas? So we've given people, an idea for a different structure that won't require them to revamp their staff training week. They just need to identify these pillars or these core competencies right at the outset, at the beginning of the week, and do this kind of spiraling back so that learning sticks, and the things we're asking people to do come more naturally because they're connected to one of those pillars. What's new in terms of content?
Well, that's a really great question, because I feel like that's one of the places that we struggle. We all have like these huge lists of things that we want to talk about. There's not a lot of like new things that happen in youth development, none of like groundbreaking, like, oh, we should all be doing this. The research says, and none of us have been doing it forever or whatever. There's not a lot.
Right.
But one of the things that last couple of years I've been talking to a lot of camps about, I think is really important, considering culturally where we are in this sort of moment in history, but also for kids, is this idea of consent. I really want all of us to really be talking about this. Now, I know how probably a lot of you are feeling like, whoa. Yeah, it's probably good for us to talk about consent within our staff. But, with kids, it's really sort of like the framework anyways in our culture is really around sort of sexuality and issues like that. So do we really want to bring that up with kids? We're not sex educators, all that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm saying. I think the sort of broader idea of consent is something that we can start working on with kids. In fact, I think we do work on with kids all the time. We just don't use that word. And I think if we started using that word and building those skills, by the time we get folks moving into that space, maybe as teenagers or young adults, they will have a lot more familiarity with it, a lot more skills with it. Yeah. So talking about choices that kids are making, talking about what's okay and what's not okay, and the rules that you get to have about yourself, doing one thing or not doing something else. Those kinds of ideas are built into consent. So can we start looking at that in some of our thoughtful conversations with staff around what are some skills that we're teaching that lead kids to not only protect their own ability to consent to something or not, but also sort of afford it to everybody else around them, and make sure that that's okay. Like, we're all playing a game, it's at night, we're playing truth or dare in the cabin, one kid doesn't want to play. How can we make that okay in that situation? How can that just be okay because that kid's deciding they don't want to do it? They can hang out, they can listen, they can whatever, but they don't have to do it. How can we make those simple moments like that happen at camp all the time really okay, and something we talk about, and something that we label consent?
It's I think it's wonderful to be able to lay the foundation in the way that you're describing for a kind of consent to sexual activity that will happen later in life, for most of our campers, and not seem foreign if someone, when they're 8 years old, and is teaching them archery, says, okay, so look, your bow arm needs to be pretty straight, but not having your elbow locked. Is it all right if I touch your arm and sort of move that, to say, can I put my hands on your shoulders and rotate your body toward the target? It might seem like a really small thing. I think that as staff members, we're so much older than our youngest campers, let's say day camp or overnight camp, that we don't stop to think, I should probably ask this kid whether it's okay. I see a lot, very, in loving, well-intentioned ways, staff just taking some sunscreen and putting it on a kid's back, and they might say, oh, buddy, the sun is really hot today, I don't want you to get burned. And I don't think any kids are super weirded out by that. No. But what you're saying is we should be laying the foundation for consent by using that sort of language. It's like, hey, the sun's really bright. I've got some suntan lotion here. How about if I put some on your back? I'm worried about this exposure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I even think it can go to the level of like, all right, we just got to arts and crafts, and it's like this project or that project. Like, which one do you want to do? You get some choice here. It can be this or that. And they say, oh, I want to do that. Great. That's an awesome idea. If you have some other ideas of what you want to do later, just let us know. You can maybe join the other group, or you can do we always used to call it at my camp junk box, which was just like, get the art stuff out and make art or whatever. But
right.
But the point is that essentially, right, which is a conversation every single camp or camp counselor has every day, a million times a day, is actually couched in consent. Like, you're choosing to do this or that, and then if we're teaching our staff to just be more intentional and thoughtful about that, and just follow that up with, and we in that particular example, the word consent would be weird, but that's what we're talking about. We're talking about choice. We're talking about, like, you have the power, right? And so exercise that power and let's practice it. And what does that mean? And you choose this. So you're doing that project, which means you can't do that project, which means you won't have the picture frame that everyone else is going to have, but you are going to have the cool candle or whatever else, whatever the thing that you decided to make. So again, I think it can go all the way down to that level. I of course agree exactly with what you were saying. And I think all of us can think of so many moments where, in that really helpful way, I can think of, you probably saw this a million times a day, right? People who are lifeguards who are teaching kids how to swim, right? I mean, just the fact of the matter is, if you're trying to teach a kid how to back float, you're going to put your hands on them. Like, that's how you teach them how. Right? But if we could be thoughtful enough in that 5 seconds before it to go, we're going to do some back floats, we're going to get in the water, we're going to play around, we're going to play this game. Part of the game is me sort of holding you up. Are you cool? Do you want to do that? Do you not want to do that? That's fine too. Whatever the case may be. As simple as that, and then we're off and running, and the kids are now getting that experience. So I would think a lot about that in some of your trainings and some of your sessions. How can we bring that idea up? How can that be maybe something that we return back to as we're talking about different skills and different knowledge that we want to give folks during particular sessions?
That's cool. So for me, a cool topic, if we can switch gears a little bit here, is inclusion. And again, just like when you say consent, people think about sexual behavior. When you say inclusion, people think about racial sorts of things, or not discriminating against somebody with a particular gender identity or sexual orientation or whatnot. But I think that just as we're trying to lay the foundations for consent in the ways you and I were discussing, we can lay the foundations for inclusion before we get to the uncomfortable space of discrimination. And I say uncomfortable space, I don't just mean for the person who's on the receiving end of some kind of discriminatory behavior, but I mean in a training session, these are topics that make people a little bit uncomfortable. But if you say, I want you to think about inclusion in this way, if the staff member is supervising some activity and wants to be sure that the teams are equal and or roughly equivalent, and it's not like all the boys over here and all the girls over here, or whatever it might be, that will make people feel excluded, or maybe they look like a girl to you, but they identify as a boy, so they want to be on the boys team. And before you even get there, I think that one of the things we can do is teach our youngest kids, 5, 6 years old, to be proactive in how they include other people. Like, literally, I think teaching kids, okay, when you're hot and sweaty and looking for a buddy to go to general swim, awesome. And when you find that buddy, don't head down to general swim yet, right? You're part of a community that is inclusive in the broadest sense of the word. I want you to take a look around your unit or division or cabin area and see, is there any kids sitting by themselves? Or are there any kids who don't look like they've changed into their bathing suit, don't have their towels, but would be really excited if somebody asked them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a kind of inclusion that I would really love to see more of. We're kind to other people when the circumstance allows for it, or really sets us up for success in that way. But we don't often go that extra step and look for, who else could be part of this. Like, somebody asks you to play catch with them, or toss a frisbee, fabulous. And you might feel like, well, like, what more is there to do? Mm-hmm. But I think we can put it on our campers to say, you're going to start something, you're going to do something, take a look around. Like, who else could be part of this, right?
And I also think, too, that what's going to support our campers actually doing that is us working to create a more inclusive culture, right? Where that's kind of what you just described, that interaction that you just described is sort of what we do here at camp, right? Yeah. I think there's lots of ways to do that are subtle. One of the things that I talk all the time with camps about is, and you've heard me say this sort of tagline before, is weird but not wrong. And that's one of the ways that I have a lot of staff think about behavior that they're seeing right in front of them. It's amazing to watch young people correct kids, whether they have disabilities or not, doesn't matter. It's amazing to watch them correct behavior, because half the time maybe it's like not really important to correct. Certainly if they're being disrespectful, or if they're hurting somebody, or, violating any of the rules, of course, we're going to correct that behavior. Right. But a lot of times kids are just like being weird, just being themselves, being a little out of control or whatever, right? It's like,
I was never like that, by the way. I was never like that. But I'll just go with the hypothetical.
Right? We were totally the quiet, docile kid. It's like I see it all the time, even in my house, right? Where like my boys, 4 and 6, are being all wild, running around, pretending to shoot each other, all this kind of stuff. And maybe the shoot each other part, I'll stop. But there's not a real reason other than like, I don't like the loud running around. They're not breaking anything. They're not wrestling. They're not putting your hands on each other. They're just being loud. So I have to stop myself. And it's not necessarily weird, but that's how I say it in my mind. Like, all right, that's just weird behavior, but it's not wrong. So I think if we can teach staff to think through that, that's going to automatically create more inclusiveness, just as far as like backing off. Right. Another one I teach all the time is with camps. I just say, like, look, limit the competition right at the beginning of an experience. And I'm not some hippie that thinks like everybody wins and everybody wins at camp and gold stars for everybody, and I don't like any of that stuff, right? I just don't think we need to have like the 3-on-3 basketball tournament on like the first day of camp. Like, can we wait till day 3 when people are a little bit more settled and kind of in their groove to then introduce some more of that competition, right? I mean, competition by definition is exclusive. So let's wait a little bit. Like, how about we just do non-competitive games for the first day or 2 or whatever, get people a little bit more comfortable, and then introduce some of that stuff. So I think there are ways culturally we can make what you were saying a thing. Like, this is what we do.
And if you think about some of the, by the way, I just posted a little sticky note in the chat room, because I see we're at, it's 1:28, and we'll do a little speed round of questions here in a minute. So got any questions for me and Scott, go ahead and type them in the chat room. But if you think about, of course, everybody who works at a summer youth program would say, okay, we want the young people who are our clients to really enjoy this experience. How do we integrate weird but not wrong? And of course, what I saw all the time as waterfront director is kids who are in a rowboat for the first time, like rowing backwards. I think it's a little counterintuitive that here I'm going to sit in this boat and I'm going to face the stern, not the bow. Yeah. And, I'm going to be pulling. Now, if someone's taught you how to do it, great. But honestly, rowing, being in rowboats, as long as you have your PFD on and it's not a stormy day, like that was pretty much one of those things that we didn't provide a lot of instruction on.
Sure. Or it would have been a great opportunity to be like, how's that working out for you?
Right. Exactly.
And you're not going as fast as that boat? Like, what's going on? Why? And then just instead of correcting the behavior, like, let's have a good discussion about it. It's like, look, man, do you if you want to do it that way. But they're going faster because he's sitting the other way. And like, think about the physics of it, pulling versus pushing, right? And I mean, it's a big conversation to have in 2 minutes with a kid.
And we forget about, I've seen, again, well-intentioned, but typically young and inexperienced staff members, if they're the dock supervisor, standing or on the rowboat dock, like grabbing the bullhorn and yelling at kids like, you're doing it wrong, turn around, and like kids, first thing is they hear the tone in your voice and you're raising your voice because you want to get out to them and they're 200 yards offshore. But like already I went from enjoying this rowboating experience to like now I'm super anxious and
being criticized about it. I'm in a rowboat, bro.
Right? Like, how bad could I be messing this up, bro? And I feel like there's so much during school year that is framed as right and wrong. And hey, there's probably ways of getting a rowboat across the bay that I haven't even thought of, but I like the way you framed it, where you just have a conversation with a kid, like even when they come back after their 20-minute backwards row, like, sure. Dude, how was it? Another way to do it is like flip around in the seat, and before you stow the oars, let me show you how that works. And, like try that. It's much more friendly. It's much more like, I don't know. Again, back to this notion of inclusion. If we start framing things as right and wrong, I think you get anxious kids who are not willing to take healthy risks, and Maggie Loring is writing, one of the core competencies that she likes is risk awareness and teamwork. Okay, speed round. Questions from Scott. This one comes from Mark Shivers, or maybe it's Shivers, but Mark, love your question. In addition to surveys and exit interviews, do you have any thoughts on measuring staff training outcomes? So measuring staff training outcomes. What are your thoughts, Scott?
I would try to, through what I'm teaching, I would try to create some like practical things that I can observe. So I'll give you guys an example. So at my camp, at Camp Tall Tree for kids on the spectrum, we give them a bunch of different skills, but I'll just name a few. We teach them how to do a bunch of visual schedules, so how to write out a real quick schedule. We teach them how to give really clear and defined choices. So as opposed to being like anything you want at arts and crafts, it's like, well, you can do this or you can do that. And we teach them how to really do like really structured transitions, right? So setting timers and 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes, 1 more minute, all that kind of stuff. Well, I can see all those things when I go out and look and just I'm out and about, and I can interact with counselors around that. I can go up and say, how many visual schedules have you written today? And a counselor can look at me and be like, none, my kids don't need it. Or they can look at me like 50 because we need to do one for every 5 minutes. Or I didn't even think about that. Yeah, let me try that with this kid who's just like sitting here and not moving. So this is really like interesting way to look for it. And you kind of got to front load those things, right? Because you got to think through it a little bit. And what I don't want anybody to do is sort of surprise staff and go, "Ooh, I got you. You didn't do the one thing that we were talking about." So I would like sort of set them up and say, "Here are the kinds of things that we're going to look for or talk to you about when there's issues with kids, or a conflict with your co-counselor, or there's a scheduling problem or whatever." Right. So looking for that stuff. I also think the last piece I always like to include with evaluations and assessment is talking about personal sort of / professional goals that individuals during training are sort of accomplishing those things both in a self-assessment kind of way as well as from their supervisor. Right. Because I think the distance between setting my goal and accomplishing something, that distance is staff training, is the support you're getting, is the skills that you're getting, is the coaching that you're receiving, the support you're getting from your co-counselors. That's what makes the difference there. And it's not necessarily as quantitative as my first example, but I think if somebody is doing really well at accomplishing their goals, then we should be able to look backwards and identify, well, what are some of the things that we did, whether it was training or sort of along the way, that supported that goal.
That's good. All right. Mark Davis writes, any success or failure stories you can share about staff training? Wow, that's like a whole nother webinar. I'll just say one. We'll move on to another question, but I think this is going to be helpful for everybody. If you have a staff training week, it's reasonable to give your staff like a night off. They're getting pumped full of a lot of information, but my recommendation is that be an in-camp night off, and that you can, play the guitar, you can sing songs, you can cookout, you can have some nice food, but if staff go out and stay out late or stay out and drink, and you expect that the next morning they're going to be ready to soak in more complex content, that's a failure. And that's a structural failure, meaning, really something that needs to change about how things are lined up.
I mean, same is true for the sessions that we're all running after 8:30 p.m.
Right.
It's like they're not. I mean, and I hate to say this, especially to all the resident camps out there, because you're like, please don't say it, Scott. Please don't say it. But they're just like not retaining any of that information. It's just like not a time any of our brains can learn. We can certainly be up and doing stuff. We can have a lot of fun during those times. We can do a lot of bonding. We can experience a lot of the program. I love it when people are doing, really creative things like night swims, if you have pools with lights, obviously, or night hikes or things like that. I think there's a lot of fun things you can do that actually will help them be a great camp counselor. I just don't think we can actually do any of the traditional teaching that we do at night, and same with morning after any kind of off-camp off-camp time off.
Yeah, I want one of the ways we change things at Camp Belknap, where where I worked for 36 summers and still do some consulting to, if there's something wrong if we're blowing up playground balls at 9 a.m. and then at 10 at night we're talking about parameters of safe touch. Right, like you said, the after-hour stuff can be contributing to camp, but let's do more of the mindless things, after hours. When we're dialed in, that's when you really need to be focused on the more complex material. Amy, so now we got to go super quick. So 15-second answers. If you were only able to teach one thing in your training, what would it be?
Communication skills.
Yeah, okay, so I get to say a different thing, but my one thing would be—
First time I've ever answered in under 15 seconds, by the way.
I would say seek the joy. You got to have fun with this job. Phil Regatta, first thing your kids will hear is your tone of voice. Good. Thank you for the quote. Hashtag Nugget of Wisdom. Shout out to Phil. Colleen O'Connor, how do you find time to address concerns in the moment? The camp day is busy and not a lot of time to use that teaching moment. Oh, wow, that's a hard one to answer in 15 seconds. I think, Colleen, what I would say, be brief, but don't let the moment disappear. You do not need to shut down everything and have a 20-minute conversation. Literally, it could be a 30-second quick exchange and you can return to it. But I think if the day is full of, as Scott said, clear communication, those can be brief.
I think that too, they can be one and the same. I think you can work through problems on the ground by using sort of a teaching method, talking out loud about what the thought process is, asking way more questions. And I think we typically, as the camp directors and as the leadership, when we get pulled into situations, it's because it's been elevated to that height, right? They need us, right? So often we just come in and we kind of sort it out, fix the problem and move on, call the parent, do whatever we need to do, which is all fine and good. That's why they called us. That's why we're there. We want to fix this problem. So I'm not saying, just, let them struggle and figure it out. I'm saying that through that process, can we just be more vocal about what we're doing? Can we ask more questions about what's going on to the particular person? Can we say, well, what do you think? Well, if we tried this, if I called the parent and said this, if we put these kids in the same class together, whatever the problem is, and just do more of it out loud, I think we end up doing a lot more teaching in those moments, and we don't necessarily have to sort of fix the problem and then move on to the teaching moment. What would we have done differently? It becomes maybe more of the process, and that's I think important.
Yeah, a successful kickball period is one where there's some poor sportsmanship, and you hold on to the ball while you are debriefing a little bit with two kids, but obviously within earshot of everyone, and it becomes part of that activity. So now everybody's walking away with a clear idea of what it means to be a good sport, or again, it will feel like it's taking a lot of time if you have to stop everything. If you roll it in, as Scott is saying. I also get asked all the time, how do we fill these 10 minutes of transition time? Like, teach us some low prop games, because, kids are walking from swimming to archery and there's 10 minutes. And I think, oh my gosh, those are some of my favorite minutes of the day. I want to either walk along with a fellow staff member and ask them, how do you think you did? How did I do? How did that go? And we're doing a little PD, a little professional development in those 10 minutes. Or I'm spending time with kids, talking with them, asking them, what do they feel they learned? And again, it's not that you couldn't do a game, but you want to weave in some training and professional development or individual work with campers, and you feel like we don't have the time to put the brakes on.
Mm-hmm.
Think about those transition times, right?
That's the best time to ask kids what's going on.
Right? Yeah.
And they tell you all the best stuff in the 10 minutes between archery and swimming. That's when you're going to hear the best stuff. That's when you're going to, hear some of the issues too, right? Like, well, I don't know what's going on with those guys. They seem to hate each other right now. Right. Or that counselor was mean to me. Like, that's the kind of stuff you're going to hear. Yep. And, I'm not advocating, like, go be a mole and like trying to, but it's like, that's the best time with kids, that unstructured, just hanging out. I mean, yeah, you're on the move, but that's some of the best times with kids.
Yeah. All right. So Scott and I have provided bonus 10 minutes for everybody, but we do need to wrap up. And I'll just end on another high note. Jody Lacer is asking, she's a first-year camp director, what's a bit of advice we could give? And, I'm going to steal this advice from Scott and share it with the whole group. Please remember, Jody, you're not alone. Lean on your senior staff. Lean on your professional colleagues that you've met at conferences who are not part of your particular camp community. That first year, it might feel lonely at times if you aren't reaching out. Yes, the buck stops with you, but boy, you're connected. And as long as you stay connected, I think you'll have your answers.
Yep.
All right, Scott, close it out for us and wish everybody whatever you want to wish them for the next few months. No pressure.
Okay. What do I wish for everybody right now? Oh, no, I wish everybody the gift of time here on May 16th. I wish everybody the perspective of time. I really hope that everybody spends, whether you only have a couple of days because Chris is coming to you on Wednesday, or whether you have another month because, training doesn't start until middle of June. We all are starting to feel the pressure. And a lot of times that's just perspective. When we step back and we look at our lists and we say, well, what needs to get done and what's the most important things and prioritizing and all that, we can get kind of lost in the whole sort of overwhelming feeling of that. And so I wish you time. I wish you perspective around your time. And I wish you all the ability to do the counterintuitive thing when it comes to your time, which is making sure that you have balance in your life. So go home tonight, actually at dinner time, go on a date night, listen, put your headphones on at work and just listen to music, do whatever you need to do that brings you balance and makes you feel good.
Words of wisdom. On behalf of the entire Expert Online Training team, thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful summer. We'll be back with our next EOT Express series in September. So everybody, have an awesome summer. Take care.